Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Jess Spiro, Head of Content here at Simple. And on behalf of our team, thank you so much for tuning in today. For those who are unfamiliar with us, Simple is an independent knowledge, data, and access provider to the next generation of family offices. And today we are tackling strategic service provider selection. Why are service providers key to family office success? How can the right or wrong partnership affect operations? How does a family office find the best provider fit? Our expert panel will be discussing this and more. Leading our discussion on behalf of Simple is Kyle MacDonald. Kyle is a venture builder at BCG, where after 8 years of working in family offices, he designs, builds, and scales new businesses focused on delivering impact for his clients. Joining Kyle today is our panel of family office experts. It is my great pleasure to introduce Lisa Cornwell. Her partner PwC focuses on international private clients and family offices, where she advises some of the largest and most complex global private groups on matters such as international tax and structuring, succession, and governance topics. Next, we've got Rebecca Maguire. Rebecca is the founder and CEO of EFO Advisory Services, a firm focused on delivering bespoke solutions to family offices by helping them create a solid foundation to grow upon. And lastly, we've got Harinder Hundle, the founder and managing partner of Hundle, a multifamily investment office based in London that delivers tailored advice across investment management, wealth planning, and corporate finance. Everyone, thank you all for joining us today. I'm excited to hear what insight you have to share. Before I hand over to Kyle, I'd like to remind everyone watching to send in any questions throughout the discussion. We'll keep an eye on the comment section and make sure everything is answered. That's all from me. Over to you, Kyle.
Thank you so much, Jess. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Really excited to have a scintillating conversation today. The aim of the session, as Jess sort of outlined, we're really going to be looking at the importance of building these resilient ecosystems of partners, both for family offices and service providers. To give you kind of a bit of an idea of what the agenda holds in store for us today, we'll be sort of diving a little bit deeper into the backgrounds of the individuals who are with us. So Lisa, Rebecca, and Harry, we're going to be diving into a little bit about who you are and what it is that makes you tick. We then will begin to explore a little bit of the importance as to why family offices seek out service providers. And then looking at how, that age-old question of how to balance privacy and trust when beginning to make those considerations of who and how to partner with, and then beginning to look at how to get started. So, really thinking about how family offices can think about managing those partnerships for success, and then finally looking at, the future. So where, as family offices begin to kind of shift and navigate the markets today, how might service providers begin to create sort of resilience going forward? So perhaps I'll start off with you, Lisa. It'd be great to hear a little bit about your journey, who you are and how you got into what you're doing today.
Thank you, and good evening, afternoon, and good morning to everybody who's joining online. So as Jess said, my name's Lisa Cornwell. I'm a partner with PwC based in Switzerland. I'm not Swiss, I'm a Brit, but I've been living in Switzerland for the last 12 years. I've worked in both professional services and in private banking, working with families and family offices at all stages of the journey. And I guess today when I join the discussion, I'm coming at it both as a service provider who may or may not be picked to work with families or family offices, but also we work alongside family offices to help them work out who's a good fit to help them achieve the strategic aims that they've agreed with the family. So I'm coming at it from two different aspects, I guess.
Fantastic. Thank you. Rebecca, over to you.
Thank you. I'm Rebecca Maguire. I am the founder of EFO Advisory Services. We focus on operations within family offices. I've worked in the industry for about 20 years. Started off actually as a personal chef, even though my first job out of college was at KPMG as a consultant. So I have a finance background, but everything that I did in my younger years brought me to family office. I've been a key member or lead executive building out 5 multi-billion-dollar family offices, both from the inside and at EFO. My team has over 45 years working in the industry from the inside. And similar to Lisa, while we work with families and advise them, as an outsider, we also help them choose advisors, from tax, legal, accounting, IT, security, and help them vet, who's best for their family office.
Fantastic. And then Harry, over to you.
Great, thank you, Carl. I'm Harry Hundle, also known as Harinder, and I run Hundle and Partners, which is we like to say, a multi-single family office. I've been in the industry for over 20 years. Of those, roughly 15 years was with JP Morgan and Credit Suisse, and then I ran a single family office. And our whole philosophy here at Hundle is really about delivering this single family office experience to multiple families. And I think with a very intentional recognition that with our open architecture approach, both on the investment, wealth structuring and corporate finance side, we need to go out to sort of best practitioners in the market. It's our role to select them and the appropriate ones for each family, which, by the way, those families can be very different in their needs. And so therefore, sort of in this new age of technology and openness, we think our approach is absolutely appropriate.
Fantastic. So as you can see, we have a fantastic panel today, sort of a very macro view from PwC with multiple sort of lenses that they're able to support. Obviously, outside-in view when it comes to Rebecca's approach, but also this experience that she's able to draw from being inside out. And then obviously Harry being able to really add that financial lens as well, having sort of run family offices, but now sort of advising them as well. So I guess diving a little bit into sort of a bit of a baseline understanding, and maybe I'll sort of throw this question over to you, Lisa. When typically family offices, which come in many shapes and sizes, begin to kind of think about seeking out service providers to support them, what do they begin to, what are the typical questions that get knocked on your door with?
So I guess there are two different ways that family offices will start to talk about working with service providers with us. Either family offices at the startup phase or those that are well established. Maybe I'll start with the well established ones. Almost by definition, if they're coming to talk to us, it probably means something's going wrong. Now, it might not be that they've had an event that's a problem so far, but it might be that they're aware that they are not managing a risk or they're not maximizing an opportunity in the best way that they could, and they need some help externally. So it could also be they're looking to expand into a different area. So they're looking to go into hedge funds, for example, and they don't have very much hedge fund expertise in-house. Do they want to build that out in-house or not? And that will prompt a discussion. If it's a family office that's being established, and Rebecca will know a lot about this, often one of the things we see is, from our perspective, if we're helping design the family office, we're saying from outset, what services do you want to insource? What do you want to outsource? And having a very clear understanding when you start of what you actually want the family office to do. In reality, that develops over time. So we often see family offices try to take on a lot in the first few years, and then over time work out actually what are those key services we'll keep in-house and what are the ones that we can start to outsource. Maybe I'll pause there, and because Rebecca, I feel like I'm directly speaking to you when I'm
Yeah, I mean, I think we work a lot with new family offices that are, potentially unclear of what the mission of their office will be, but they know that they need, the basics. They need tax, they need accounting, trust and estate, and usually security and IT. So, in looking at those, we like to help them understand working with advisors who work with other families and individuals at similar net worth with, potentially similar family makeups, whether there's children or siblings, how are they setting up the trust and estate? What's the ideal, tax strategy for them and tax structure? So, in deciding for a new family office, when they don't exactly know what they're going to do, some of them do know that they want to focus on impact and philanthropy, and that makes it a lot easier. But for the ones that don't, we tend to try and find them who we think is best, and do an RFP of 3 to 5 different advisors that operate at their net worth, and can give them kind of the basics before they really get into what the family office is doing. And then similarly, family offices that are already structured and maybe have gone through a significant larger wealth event and go from one level to the next, we want to make sure that they're working with the advisors that operate at that income level or wealth level, and not stay with their person if they were worth like 75 million and all of a sudden they're worth 5 billion. That's not the same tax person that you're going to work with, or potentially even IT or security. So
fantastic. And I guess a bit of a question for you, Harry, around when do family offices begin to actually think about sort of outsourcing wealth versus sort of having that capability, or wealth management, should I rather say, sort of rather than having that capability in-house and managing that internally?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, the family office industry is not a homogenous one. And I think, each family office has its own way. I think we do this as practitioners from an investment management perspective. So that's our history. That's kind of our DNA. I think we've always said, we in a sense create the asset allocation of what we sort of implement our investment views, but then we really outsource the asset management. We don't profess to be the experts in, European small cap equities or be the best credit manager in the US in litigation finance. What we try to do is bring together, 15 or 20 very, very smart asset managers, and then monitor them and implement them and frankly exit them when they're not performing. So, and it's the same thing in a sense we do with our banks and our custodians. So our infrastructure that we use sort of as a private bank is sort of on an open architecture basis. And it's similar around sort of the accounting. We actually have in-house wealth planning, but we never sign off. So we will go to the PwCs, the EYs of this world, and I guess to Rebecca's point, work out who the right accounting and legal firm is for that family. And so we don't have sort of a single firm we will go to for all our 14 families. We will go to different firms depending on their wealth, their jurisdiction, and what they're specifically looking for. So that's how we engage. For other family offices, they don't go as far as us. They will outsource all the investment management and just really start with and do the asset allocation and say everything else we're going to appoint a third party manager. And again, that's a slight differentiation versus what we do.
Right. And I guess, Lisa, thinking a little bit more around, nervousness. Ultimately, a big part of family offices' sort of journey to maturity is thinking about managing risk. In the beginning, there's a series of unknown unknowns, and that's probably many reasons why they might come to you. But then sort of as they sort of mature in their journey, there's a series of known unknowns. It'd be great to hear a little bit about how you typically think about risk and how you help to manage some of that.
So we try to take a very systematic approach to risks. So there's the truism that I'm sure everybody on the call has heard, that once you've seen one family office, you've seen one family office, which everyone will have their own view on that. We think that actually when you look across family offices, they are all different and the families are different, but the risks they face, the areas they're typically working in, you will see similar risks.
Yeah.
So for those existing families, we first of all try to work out, as Rebecca and Harry have said, what are they actually looking to insource? What are they looking to outsource? And then effectively risk assess those services themselves. So if it's something like managing real estate for the family that the family uses, that's a different risk profile. You're going to be thinking about different considerations for the service provider there to if it's landscaping at the family office buildings, or if it's an investment. They're ridiculous.
I like that comparable. That's great.
but they're different types of risk. And when you look at a listed entity, a bank, for example, they will have risk matrices for all of their vendors that they're working with. And whilst family offices aren't necessarily as structured as that, having that kind of structured thinking about, well, when I first start thinking about my known unknowns or my unknown knowns, whichever way around it is, I think that's a good starting point is, well, the things that I'm looking to outsource, actually, how risky are they? How sensitive do we need to be? Then think about the process that you'll apply to a service provider selection.
Oh, seem to have lost you, Lisa. Yeah.
Oh, I stopped talking.
I can see Lisa. She's there.
Yeah, I can see her too.
Yeah.
Do we lose Kyle?
Yeah. No, I can see Carl, but
Yeah, I can too, but I don't know if he can hear us.
I'm still here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. Great. Well, I guess, yeah, sorry, Lisa, I interrupted you. But thinking a little bit more, I guess, about how family offices can think about sort of what a successful partnership begins to look like. So I guess in your case, Rebecca, you obviously sort of went out into the world, sourced partners and service providers. Some of them went well, some of them didn't. No doubt that's the process of running a series of experiments and, building up a series of partnerships you can trust over time. Without sort of any context or knowledge of your particular circumstances or experiences, but just based on mine, that was definitely the world I experienced. But it'd be great to hear a little bit about what was it that you think was the sort of steel thread between family office service providers that were really sort of strong and trustworthy over time.
Yeah, I mean, I think luckily a lot of the mistakes that were made were when I was running a family office, only because we were just starting out in the early, 2000s, and there wasn't that much data and as much information and knowledge about family office then. And so one of the things we joke about with our clients is, we've already made all the mistakes, so you should just learn from what, we already went through. And I think during that time, between 2007 and 2011, we made a lot of those mistakes early on with the principal that we worked for, who had more wealth than most people in the world. But in learning, who worked well and who didn't and who understood the industry are really people who understand, that they need to remain dynamic. They need to keep learning, when it's IT, it's security, even, investment, tax, accounting, that they're staying up, on the everything new that's coming out, all of the cutting edge technology, new tax laws, all of those things, but that they also understand that they should be plug and play, that at any given time, the family might decide to bring things in-house, or there might be a divorce, or they might just decide to downsize their life. I had a family that I worked for that, decided that they didn't want accounting in-house anymore. It was just too many people. So they completely dissolved their accounting team and, ended up going with Anderson Tax and building it out entirely there. And they kept a controller and an assistant controller, but they probably had 25 people. So, but I think in working with vendors, we want them to be really great at what they do and build the best platform for our clients, but we also want to be able to remove them at any time. And it's those vendors, those service providers that I've always, enjoyed working with, and they really truly understand that some of the decision making at the family level can be emotional or relationship based, and they might just decide to switch a service provider because a family member has a relationship or something like that. So the ease of the plug and play, to be able to just plug it in and then easily remove themselves, and that's also how we've built our firm, and that we can help you establish and put all of these things in place, and then we normally remove ourselves after we've hired you a manager. But I think those are the people that I trust the most, that understand the families the most, because they're not trying to embed themselves forever. They're really looking out for the best interest of the family.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So I think something quite interesting about family offices as well is obviously, these are quite nimble, lean organizations that move really quickly. But at the same point, they're sort of people, sometimes service providers might mistake them for another traditional multi-billion-dollar industry or business. But ultimately, they're a small team of people. Something there that I want to pick up on and sort of pass over to Harry was this idea of being sort of data-led and data-informed. How much are you beginning to kind of see that as something that clients increasingly are asking for in terms of supporting decision-making?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of one of the key sort of criteria for us, often with sort of service providers, whether it's investment, whether it's tax consultancy, whether it's, you know, even sort of the more niche art advisory piece, is actually transparency around price and cost, understanding what they're getting, and that kind of like has to feed through to sort of the total cost of the service that they provide, you know, that they're being provided through ourselves. So I think there's a lot around sort of understanding the data there, and then clearly, you know, there's more the data analytics sort of on the investment management side. Obviously, that's very important. What's driving returns, and frankly, you know, again, depending on sort of why we're selecting that service provider and what service they're paying, it's like, okay, we just want absolute transparency on sort of, you know, what's driving the firm, and understanding kind of what we're getting into. And if that needs data, it doesn't always, but if it does, then we want access to it, and certainly our families do. I think sort of having everything in writing today and being able to provide that quickly and proactively, I think is key to our families.
All right. And I guess, yeah, this leads really nicely on to the next section, which is this idea of beginning to think about how do family offices begin to actually consider the right partners? What are their selection criteria? You know, and really there's always this challenge around balancing trust and that sort of privacy. So perhaps, again, I'll sort of pass the ball back to Lisa, but it'd be great to hear about, you know, when you're thinking about what best practice might be for family offices, how should family offices begin to go about researching which service provider to use? Should they be seeking out advisory first and then sort of looking at service providers? How should they begin to engage to ensure that that privacy is maintained? It'd be great to hear your experience.
Okay. I mean, I think one thing that comes up all the time is, like you said, the balance of privacy and trust, and trust is really the key thing always. How does the family office, and often then the family, kind of quickly, if it's possible, manufacture trust sufficiently that you can feel comfortable to start working? So I think the first thing is working out what you are actually looking for and what your expectations are. So it's one thing if you're thinking to outsource all of your accounting. It's a different thing if it's, well, we'll keep these bits in-house and these bits out, and there's going to be an expectation that there's an ongoing relationship and people are talking every day. So the first is being clear on exactly what it is that you're looking for. And then I think it's very easy to rely on, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's very easy to rely on existing relationships and start asking around to other families, other family offices, and your existing providers. We're looking for X. Is there anyone you can recommend? And I do think word of mouth and reviews is a really good way to start that process, to start your research, with a note of caution that you have to make sure that the people you're asking understand what you're asking them and give you the right information back, so you're all on the same page. I think also, if you look online now, to Rebecca's point, if we were having this conversation 15 or 20 years ago, there was a dearth of data. It was very difficult to know who was strong in this space. There was not much kind of thought leadership around. But there's a lot more now. Simple, I'm not saying it just because it's a simple webinar, but sources like Simple are really helpful. And there's loads of information actually that you can start to use to get an idea already of who you're looking to work with. Obviously, branding comes into it, which is easy for me to say in a global firm because that's something that we do have. But that piece about brand, you know, for a smaller organization, that's where the word of mouth starts to come in again. So there's this kind of scene setting, exploratory work. And then we come into the more kind of specifics of actually really kind of hard data points that you want to know. And those data points will be different for different types of providers. So You might be interested in the financial strength of an organization if they're doing, well, you will be interested if it's investment management and custody. You might be less interested if they're going to be the provider of catering at events. It might be a factor, but less important. So you start with this kind of scene setting and information gathering, and then start to get into more specific, detailed information gathering.
Great. And then, Rebecca, it'd be great to obviously pull on your previous experience, but also your experience now is when you're thinking about, sitting inside that family office and having to actually do the due diligence yourself. You might or might not always have at your disposal a huge team to sort of support with that due diligence process. But at the same point, there is obviously a level of detail you need to sort of drill down into. How do you go about doing that effectively?
Yeah, it's definitely different when you're in-house versus an advisor. So, when I ran family offices and was in-house, I had to be really nimble and efficient. And a lot of that is what I brought here and used with multiple families, but coming up with processes where, during our diligence process, having a consistent, list of questions, data, information about the firm, references from other families and clients. I think really having strong process around it was the only way I could survive, when building a couple of the offices that I worked for, being brand new and having a really small team, but we needed to grow it very quickly. And I'll use hiring as an example. I mean, that takes a ton of your time. And when you're trying to find a recruiter or headhunter that can find you people, in running a multi-billion-dollar family office and all of the things that went along with that, I didn't have all day to be, scrolling through resumes. And so the process actually that we use here is what I developed when I ran one of the family offices in Silicon Valley, which was putting the recruiter to work and the candidates themselves in answering certain questions for me, doing personality tests, filling out case studies, writing samples. I wanted to understand, who these people were and if they could pass a certain, test for me or multiple, then I would speak with them. And I think, when it comes to other service providers, in asking all the questions that we put out in an RFP, it has the work I would primarily put onto the vendor or the service provider. And then, references from other families and clients were huge because, as Lisa said, it really starts word of mouth, between the family offices. Who are you using? What did you do? But in really getting to talk to some of those clients to understand, what went well or what potentially went wrong with some of these vendors, is usually more important. And again, as I referenced earlier, are they dealing with people at your level? Because I think, everyone on this call understands that the difference between someone who's worth 300 million and who's worth 10 billion, they're vastly different. And it all seems like a lot of money to people not in our industry. But when you get that far apart, I mean, things start operating at light speed and it's a completely different landscape. So really strong process, putting the work on them.
Yeah. And I think, again, that's kind of a testament to the service providers you work with, if they have the ability to do the work, to provide you with the right answers and the right support in that selection process and that RFP process. Clearly they're the type of partner you want to work with. We've got a great question that's come through in the chat from Thomas Nicholson. And I'm going to sort of rephrase this a little bit, but just thinking a little bit about fees. The age-old question when it comes to, anyone thinking about fees for service providers, knowing if the price is the right price. How do we begin, or what would you sort of see as potential sort of best practice? You don't always know which fees are the right fees for the right family office. Is the price right? How do you sort of navigate that world of getting the right level of transparency up front when the scope of the task might be slightly ambiguous, or you don't really know the client yet? How do you build that trust, and how do you navigate sort of fees?
Yeah. Is that a question for me,
That's
Carl?
a question for you, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think, look, I think there's increasing importance around this transparency point. I mentioned it earlier. I think I think, the more transparent, the better. I mean, I think pricing, and then there's actual pricing. And I think our role often is, to provide explanations and context around how that compares for the service the clients, are actually paying for, and at the end, the cheapest price is not the best price often. So I think that's really important. We always, talk about the value sort of quality, but we do try to break it down. We'll provide sort of total expense ratios on the investment side, and that's becoming a regulatory requirement. I mean, there's no debate around that, and we think that's created the better practice in the market. But yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think it's a fine line. I think in our position, it's important for us just to give the context and also understand which clients are more price sensitive than others. So again, for those who are more price sensitive, there's going to be more explanation around it. If you just throw it out there, that can create some very painful conversations. So you have to proactively be sort of one step ahead. And again, know your client. Knowing your client's not just about what they want from an investment perspective or what they want to pass in terms of sort of assets to the next gen. It's actually understanding emotionally how they feel about information, and price is a big thing in that, right? I mean, Lisa and Rebecca will be aware of this. I mean, again, when people have set up their own single family offices, they have a view on what it's going to cost. And, that changes over time, both the number itself, but also their sort of their emotional and financial view around the value of that, right? And that's something we're sort of constantly debating. I mean, I think we say to our families in terms of our service, it's sort of quality at a reasonable price is our mantra. And again, we think it's reasonable, but some families don't always think it's reasonable when we start with that conversation. But we say at the end, if you don't agree with that, if you don't agree with that statement on a joint basis as advisor and client, then this relationship's not going to work out over the long term. So it's always having those honest discussions, but transparency at the end is key. If you don't give the transparency and the client is price sensitive, you're going to have a problem.
Yeah. I totally agree. And we've had a case recently where a family office was signing up for some new technology, and they thought they were being given a transparent overview of what it would cost. And once they actually got into it and started transferring data over, it turned out there were multiple hidden costs that you couldn't avoid. There was a charge to put this asset on because it's a different asset to the one that was quoted. Things like that. And it instantly leaves a really bad taste in the mouth. And if you're trying to, whether it's to be a plug and play or a longer term support for the family office, you've got to have the trust. And the easiest way to destroy it is to not be upfront about the fees. Yeah. One thing we try and do is we have a pretty good sense of how much things might cost. There's a lot of tasks that come up time and again, so we can give a fee range. So, and I think one thing that family offices like is, if you don't know, being upfront and saying we're not quite sure how much this is going to take, and once we get to this point, we'll tell you, because then we need to reassess. Because if it goes over this amount and we're only here in the project, what do we do now? And I think that kind of trying to have a dialogue. But I agree completely with Harry. It's the easiest way to destroy a relationship is to be intransparent on pricing, or worse, do all of the work and then send an invoice that's 10 times. That's something we get burned if we don't do it right.
Right. And I think, Lisa, to your point, especially a firm like PwC or someone that's doing, family office accounting, things like that, when you say, we're not sure, we think it's going to cost X, but then all of a sudden there's a ton of scope creep. And if you're not communicating along the way what that is, and then all of a sudden you present this bill that's twice as much as what you quoted because the client, asked for additional things, I think that communication along the way is so important. But I wholeheartedly agree, transparency from the beginning makes sense, especially in areas, what I've learned, where families, especially newer wealth or even, multi-gen, things like construction or areas where they're not professionals in this and they don't understand what a change order is, or I had an interesting conversation with a contractor where a client thought they were buying one of those mini houses online for like $50,000. And she thought, great, I'm going to put this little guest house up at their home in the wine country for $50,000. Well, she'd never built a house before, and she wasn't a contractor and didn't understand trenching for power lines, for water, for sewer, all of those things. So when she got, the guy went ahead and he did it, and then got the bill, and it was like closer to $700,000 because the trenching was very far from the main house. And I mean, it blew her mind. And when I had the conversation with the guy about it, he said, well, I just thought she would know. And I said, well, she's in the tech world. Why would she understand? So I think even more so the explanation of the transparency of fees, like the education as to what these things cost. Yeah. When, you can't assume just because they have money that they are knowledgeable about these things, especially if they've never done it.
Minimize the surprises, Rebecca, right?
That's yeah.
But you're right. It's really common that people assume that wealthy families and family offices just know.
Yeah.
And I find it funny that that's an assumption. You're expert in this and super successful here, therefore you must know all of this.
Right. I find it on the investment side, they assume because they've made all of this money that they actually understand their portfolio and what the liquidity means and and they don't, and they need that education. But what's more interesting is they don't often ask. They assume that their advisors are giving them, putting them into the best possible position, which unfortunately isn't always the case. But yeah, I think, the transparency and the education is so crucial. And to the person's question here, I don't think it opens you up, for criticism or anything. I think the more transparent you can be and kind of educating them as to, why you need, certain margins or how it works, I think is helpful.
Great. I guess something that's very sort of interesting, and I think back to that point of, because the source of wealth is from one industry, we kind of tend to assume that they, are hyper aware of other industries and their models. And I think that's something, within my sort of previous experience was very much focused on understanding that every different industry has a different model of charging fees, and certain might be, better from a commission basis, others might be better sort of from a fixed fee basis, and really understanding what the best model for each industry is to ensure you're sort of optimizing for cost. Moving on to, I guess, the next section, which is sort of very nicely bundled into this, which is thinking about, once you have actually signed on the dotted line with the service provider, how do you begin to actually think about monitoring and measuring that performance? And obviously, from a very sort of consulting perspective, I might sort of pass this one on to Lisa. How do you typically like to think about beginning to actually sort of monitor that process?
So I think the first thing, and I think I said this already, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself, but it is a similar point, is what are the service provider going to be doing? So I think it's easier or clearer. Harry might not say it's easier, but for investment management, there's kind of, you'll have certain metrics that you can put in. So X performance or Y income. But whatever the service provider is, what are they going to do? When are they going to do it? How much is it going to cost? And basically, do they say what they do? Do they do what they say they're going to do? Because that's what trust is. It's you work for somebody, they tell you they're going to do something, and then they do it. And so I think regularly looking at what's happening, and it doesn't, if it's a small team, it's not going to be once a month. In banks, you have people doing this constantly. But every 3 months or 6 months, 9 months, reviewing what are they responsible for and have they done that? And then there'll be things like with tax, kind of my area, tax filings. At a minimum, the tax filings were all made on time. At a minimum, the tax payments were all made on time and interest wasn't incurred. What was the experience like as well? Because and Rebecca, I'm sure you had this when you were sitting in a family office, if you're having to email once a week and say, where are we on this? What's the status on this? That doesn't leave a great taste, even if all of the other things are right. So there's a balance between kind of hard deliverables and things that you can actually measure versus that softer experience as well.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think when work in one of these offices, you're moving so quickly that, one of my rules with not only service providers, but staff is once I give it to you, it's yours and it's your responsibility to get it back to me. I can't, in running one of these offices, when you're juggling 1,000 things a week, like I don't have the time to follow up on you. And I assume that you're getting it to me on time, especially, a tax obviously has hard deadlines, but I think in some of the, more obscure services where, it's more of a service and less of something that's quantifiable. One of the benchmarks that I use is how many emails are you getting back? Like, are you getting complaints? Like, or is the family, are they just moving on? They're like, that was great. Like in thinking of someone that planned their travel, they go on some big $100,000 trip and you might not hear anything. And that's actually a great thing. And like, so for me, and I think it's difficult when you're in a family office, you don't always get the feedback because these things are moving so quickly. So in my mind, less is more. Like the less you hear about an experience almost is better.
Yeah.
When you can't, it's not an investment portfolio where you're measuring returns, but I tell teams, listen, if you're not getting any feedback and they happily got home and like moved on to the next thing, like you did a great job, because the more you hear back, usually it's something wrong. And not, not because anyone's super negative or anything, but just their lives move so quickly. But yeah, and I think just when we're bringing on new advisors or putting a new project together, really laying out what we expect from them and where we can put milestones or benchmarks, if possible. But yeah, I'd say, that strong partnership is them really assisting you when you're in-house and helping you do your job better by, coming back to you.
Yeah, and Rebecca, I mean, on that, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, even from an investment perspective, when we're doing it, it's happy clients. Like when performance is great, you don't really hear from them.
Mm-hmm.
It's when performance isn't great, those are the more difficult conversations, and so silence actually in terms of is a great verification of things working okay. I think the other thing I would just add for us in terms of service providers generally, I think, data and all those things and delivering sort of actually on what they say is key. But for us, it's also access to key decision makers. When we sort of select someone, we want, things will always inevitably, there'll be a period where it's not going quite to plan. We need to make sure we have access to the decision makers, people who can actually, fix things. And actually, when you get to sort of selecting reporting providers, or there's some very technical work and it's technology driven, that can actually sometimes be a bit of a challenge. So that's really important for us.
And yeah, I guess another question to you, Harry, is around this idea of, maybe a bit of a baseline or a benchmark around what a family should expect when it comes to updates throughout, a life cycle of a fund or something along those lines, keeping it relatively high level. But how regularly should they have a sort of touch point? What should that sort of relationship be like? Obviously, every family has a different preference, but what would you see as a potential benchmark?
Yeah, I mean, so for one, I think the first rule is it must be accurate. So any information you're sending out, better to take longer and provide accurate information than not. In terms of sort of the timing and regularity of that, we basically create a customized plan and ask the families when, how often they would like updates on various matters. So when we're in the early phase, it tends to be, everyone gets sort of a weekly update, certainly a monthly one. And then it's a question of, once things have settled in, what's the appropriate time frame? We got into kind of a culture where sometimes everyone wants everything instantly. And certainly in the investment game, or even in the wealth structuring game, when you're getting really good advice, or you're frankly just having to work through a problem scenario, rushing things or being obsessed on the sort of daily moves is not the right thing. So we have to kind of manage our families and say, look, some of these things will take longer and you need to judge it over X period, and some others it's shorter than that. So again, I think establishing sort of rules day one as to family one versus family two, it can be different, but also always doing it under the sort of, I think, philosophy of sensibility, I think is key.
Great. And Lisa, a question to you, and this is a bit of a one from Tom Nicholson around this idea of how do you begin to sort of analyze, if you have the right balance of internal capability or whether you should be sort of looking more at outsourcing a series of services. Obviously, over time, you develop a reliance on particular service providers. How do you begin to kind of evaluate that over time?
So one approach we take, and it is generally for larger family offices, although it can work for any size, is to do a kind of forensic deep dive into how are your family office staff spending their time and looking at how much that's costing, and then speaking with the family and saying, what do you value most highly that the family office delivers for you? And then comparing the two things. And spoiler alert, generally there'll be a mismatch between the two, because if you've got a robust payment system in place and over time that's developed, and actually to make a payment 3 different people have to review it, and there's a report that goes out and has to be made every month, the cost per payment is going to go up, but the family won't feel that. So then I like data. I think for family offices, data is really key. And so having data available to say, well, these are tasks that you're telling us as a family you don't maybe value, but they're costing you way more than these things that you're telling us you really do value. That then allows you to start assessing, well, actually, is there a better way or a more effective way for us to insource or outsource something? I think another thing we see is if key people leave, how do you replace those services? But that's much more reactive rather than a proactive review. So I think it's very difficult to say, well, this is the right model, because each family and every family office will have different approaches. But if you've got data to say, well, this is what we're doing and this is what you do or do not value, that's a good place to begin.
And Lisa, I remember we had a conversation before this, just spoiler alert for everyone out there, but we spoke a little bit about this sort of key aspect of trust when it comes to sort of trusting people within your family office. How do you sort of know, when's the right time to potentially think about reframing that trust going forward?
Kyle, if I'd known you were going to share our conversations. No, I'm joking. I think it's a really difficult area for family offices, because very often we see that a key trusted person will be in a senior position in the family office, particularly when it's a new family office starting. So it might be someone in an accountancy firm, it might be their lawyer, it might be the investment banker they used to work with, it might be a family member or a friend. And I think that's quite a common way to start. And there isn't anything wrong with that. But I think it's difficult if you've got clear objectives for the family office and clear services that need to be delivered. To Rebecca's point, if you've got 1,000 things coming in every week and you've spent your career in tax, for example, there's a point where I know nothing about art. I am out of my depth here and I need to work with a specialist. But I don't have a magic solution. I'm interested if the other two have anything, but I know it's a really difficult challenge. And unfortunately, sometimes it's once a problem starts that prompts the discussion.
We often say on this sort of the in-house, out-house is, expertise, right? Do you have the expertise in-house? And actually, how do you maintain expertise, right? And that always, for us, there's a minimum level of investment, depending on what service you're providing, that expertise requires. There is a cost of capital. So then for us on the investment game, it's very much, you need to have scale. If you don't have a certain amount of scale, you can't hire the right people to do those jobs. So again, and I guess to Lisa's point, when it's a little bit more niche, we're not going to go and hire sort of an in-house art consultant, because we know that's not something all our families are going to want or desire. What we then do is make sure, we go out externally and frankly, depending on the art they want, is it classic, is it modern, is it contemporary, we go and find that person, right? So again, I think for us, it's just the core of our business is X. Therefore, let's deliver that in-house, because essentially that's kind of the draw for our families. But then to kind of in a sense, a big puzzle, to put all the puzzle pieces, some of those sort of individual pieces, or many of them, are external providers because they are the individual experts. And that's kind of what we try to do here at the firm.
Yeah, makes sense. Sort of playing, the art being the conductor rather than
Right.
The orchestra itself.
And I think that's like goes for inside a family office as well, because I think early on in my career when I worked all for single family offices, and I thought in-house was the way to go, right? Like having your accounting team, being able to send a wire first thing in the morning, all the things. And again, it was so long ago, the technology wasn't the same. You couldn't, immediately get someone to do something for you, where now you can do that if they're not, sitting in your office. But I think similar to what Harry was saying, we act, we call it the quarterback here in the US, but as the conductor, like we act as that because we understand what is needed, but we're not going to say we're experts, in the security field, but I know who to go to, who is. And same thing on the tax side where, I think inside a family office, what I learned, is once you're inside, because you're so like separated in the confidentiality and the privacy, you lose some of that collaboration and dynamic, interaction.
You become siloed sometimes, right?
Siloed, and like you're not the top in the tax world anymore. You're not the top in security. You like, depending on how big your office is, you might be the top in some of these things because of how your funding is, but you're no longer seeing, what your colleagues are doing at PwC, who they're working with, and that, so knowing, I think, what you don't know and knowing when to reach out to people, is the best way to do it. And I think I've become much more of a proponent of outsourcing more than bringing everything inside, because, and then also just the human capital side, having to deal with all of the interpersonal and political issues when you build a massive single family office. That's some of what I hear candidates that we work with complain about, is they don't want to deal with the politics and the drama. They would much rather be in a very lean family office that's using a lot of advisors and, service providers that, not only are seeing what other family offices are doing and like the best, newest strategies, but also there's no drama because you're not like infighting with people about trying to get time with the principal or something like that.
And something, very much I've seen through a couple of the family offices I've worked with was, for the principal wealth owners themselves as well, sort of having this separate family office to the sort of corporation or organization that they've built becomes like having a second day job. And they're busy enough as it is. Sort of one last question in this section, and then I've got one final question, which is a bit more sort of existential. But the last question is, and this is to you, Rebecca, thinking about when you're sort of on the inside or sort of helping to manage a bit of a relationship with a service provider and things start going wrong, how do you either sort of course correct or cut the cord?
Yeah, that's a good question. Course correcting, I think bringing them back to the initial contract, what is expected of them, where are they not delivering? Why are they not delivering? Is it something on our side that, our team isn't providing? I'm trying to think of someone we had to let go. I would say generally, sometimes these companies come on and they don't realize the massive undertaking of, an ultra high net worth family office. And all of a sudden they cannot handle, the amount of work that's coming. That's probably one of the bigger reasons why, a service provider would fail. But I think in thinking back to people that we've had to let go, that would be it, where they couldn't manage the amount of work, and they thought they could, and they couldn't scale fast enough to be able to service. And then, luckily we haven't had too many of these, but where, thinking back to my early days, we worked with an outsourced family office services. They did bill pay. They were kind of like an outsourced controller, and they didn't deliver on the actual controls in place. They let someone approve some bills that had a personal relationship with a vendor out at a property, and they, approved some things that shouldn't have gone out. And so the controls completely failed and money was paid out that shouldn't have been. I think when it's time to let go, it's pretty clear when they're not delivering, what it is that you need, and things just start to fall apart.
3 strikes and you're out. That's what.
Yeah. I don't even know that it's 3 strikes.
Yeah, no,
it depends. One strike.
Yeah. When you see it going wrong, it's really going wrong. And again, like back to that, I would like my service provider and my vendors to be communicating with me. Like I would expect them to come to me and say, hey, we lost people on the team. It's going to be a little rocky, give us a month to hire or something like that. But again, like the transparency, when they're not sharing with me what's going on, and I'm just feeling the pain of like, I'm sending out to my IT guys who are outsourced and I'm not getting a response back or what. I'm like, what is going on? Like, what are you doing?
Getting ahead of the story, right? I mean, it's often what's going on. Like, again, it's back to that senior access, because sometimes it needs someone to step in and say, depending on who the service provider is and their culture, sometimes you just people who will do stuff, but they won't be proactive to explain things. And that's where senior management sometimes has to step in and be like, and that's why often if we're not getting it, we need to go very direct and have an instant response or a very quick one.
Yeah.
Great. Well, a final question, which is more sort of future facing, and perhaps we can do it as a bit of a round robin. As the geopolitical situation is obviously quite an interesting one and creating a sort of high level of volatility these days, family offices, I think now more than ever, are needing to lean into sort of strategic service providers going forward. It'd be great to hear a little bit about why you think that might be important. So sort of Lisa, over to you.
I think there's the negative and there's the positive. There's so many risks that we don't even necessarily understand what they are or how they're going to impact in the next 3 to 5 years. So I don't know, the use of AI, or like you said, the geopolitical context, what's going to happen in the next 1, 3, 5 years, we just don't know. So to have proper risk management in-house and diversify the risk, and to have that kind of panel around the family office who you can turn to get different insights and different viewpoints. I think you can only get that with good strategic, strong partnerships. But then there's the opportunity side as well, because there are things changing all the time, and we don't know what AI will look like in 3 to 5 years, and we don't know what investment opportunities there'll be in that space. And you can't have all of that knowledge in-house in a family office. You just can't. So I think there's the carrot and the stick. There's the risks that the world is changing so fast at the moment. How we use technology, what data is available, what all of those things mean. Family offices need to make sure they're really clear and up to speed on what the risks are, but otherwise they're going to miss out on opportunities as well. So I think it's both sides that mean family offices in future will continue to work with strategic service providers.
Brilliant. Rebecca, over to you. Sort of a cheeky one-liner as to why you think it's sort of essential for family offices.
Building on what Lisa said, I think the speed at which things are changing. I went to a talk on AI a couple of weeks ago, and the speed at which those things are taking off, around legal, around investment, where all of these things are already going to become automated. I think family offices don't have the scale, and they don't have the departments that are building out all of these things, but these bigger firms like PwC, Anderson, E&Y, like they're actually dedicating people to these things where they're building on it faster, and they're just going to move a lot faster than a family office. Even a multi-billion-dollar family office isn't necessarily, allocating money to build out X, platform. So I think leaning on these outside companies that are putting money into it, and as the industry builds on itself, which I think we're seeing, it's just getting more and more professional, and people are getting more insight into family office and seeing the amount of money that comes out of it. They're building on these technologies and these firms that are just going to move a lot faster than a family office can.
Great. And Harry, over to you. Same question.
I mean, I think that AI is a huge opportunity for family offices. I just think, it basically is the next stage of technological innovation. And so I think actually it allows, I think, family offices to really grasp that, it's not about the future, and it's more smart work, and frankly will allow us probably to scale up a little bit more. So I think that there's, everyone talks about the threats, but I think there's huge opportunities for firms like us who are independent and want to reach out and provide interesting solutions. I think the Middle East and the geopolitics, I mean, again, it's very much sort of the angle you take, and the families located, for example, in Israel or the Middle East. I think, this will create huge, apart from the trauma side, I think it will create big planning issues for them. Like, it just accelerates a lot of things that they, contingency plans they have, but maybe they're not activating, and now they're like, okay, we have to activate them. Then there's obviously the investment risk. Are you exposed to the region? If it's liquid, what's your view? You can take a view quite quickly. Can you take advantage of that or not? If it's more liquid, it's real estate in, Tel Aviv, or, we were looking at something for one of our families earlier this year, what looked like a very attractive investment now, people are worried about. And so you've got to manage that risk. So I think it really depends, around your exposure. Some families are frankly much less affected by it, but certainly for those from the region who are invested, it's a big risk. And we've got to try to be one step ahead and understand, is it going to spread out or is it going to stay local?
Fantastic. Well, absolutely fascinating conversation today. I really enjoyed it. I hope everyone else did as well. Jess, over to you.
Thank you, Kyle, and thank you, Lisa, Rebecca, Harry, for sharing your wisdom so generously with us. Service providers clearly play an important role for family offices, and it's exciting to see just how these partnerships are helping to shift the industry. This webinar forms part of an ongoing series where we find new ways to shed light and increase transparency into the family office industry. Our next webinar details will be announced soon, so make sure you don't miss out on that. If you would like to learn more about the work that we do at Simple, including our high-touch service offering and new products for family offices, please reach out to the Simple team. We can act as strategic discussion partners. We can help you solve specific problems like finding the right providers, or we can assist with expansion by connecting you with our network across the globe. Drop us a mail or a note in the comment section here. We would love to hear from you. Lastly, thank you to everyone who tuned in today. The Simple Network only continues to grow, and we are so proud to have such an engaging and receptive audience. For anyone who would like to revisit this discussion, the recording will be available to watch right here on our LinkedIn page or via the Simple platform. So once more, a huge thank you to everyone who made today possible. We hope to see you at the next one. Bye for now.